Welcome, explorers, to Part 5 with Captain Randy Cramer of the U.S. Marine Corps Special Sections, who is going today to give us a rare treat. I am glad all of you showed up for the Cosmic Family Discount Tour, where you will be stepping into the life of 3 extraterrestrial cultures that Randy has met and visited with. These ET cultures are not just the ones on Mars and the Moon. They are from other planets way out in our galaxy. We are introducing you first to some humanoid species, which are those that look mostly like us, 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head, so to speak. So welcome back, Randy, for Part 5. I always have so much profound fun with you. I'm like a kid in a candy shop. Are you there?
Sweet. I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Very funny. Good pun. Okay, so Randy, you may actually be the first person that most of our listeners get to listen to that has actually visited in person at least 2 extraterrestrial civilizations beyond our solar system.
That is correct.
Okay, so on one planet in particular, you had an accident, unfortunately, and so had to stay there a while to recoup. So I'm wondering if you can share with our listeners things like what that planet is called, what system it is located in, and maybe why you were sent there in the first place.
So I'm sorry. This was someplace that I had been injured and had to stay behind. I don't recall a place that I was injured and had to stay behind. I'm not recalling that version of the story.
I thought you had your ankle injured.
No, that's not me. You're thinking of somebody else. Mm-mm.
Really?
Yeah, no. They would have. If I'd hurt myself, they would have repaired it up in a matter of an hour or something.
Okay, because I'm thinking of where was it in Casseopeia? I'm thinking of Casseopeia and Alpha Centauri.
So, okay, well, I've been to the Alpha Centauri for a short visit. I spent 2 years on Sonara because I was stationed there. I wasn't injured. I was stationed there for 2 years. They were having a war with a neighbor, and we showed up to help out, and I got stationed there for pretty much from the beginning to the end of the war, which is about 2 years.
And who was the war with? Are you able to say?
Just some neighbors. I mean, some neighbors who really are of no consequence at the moment, that's for sure. But just a neighbor that had, to be honest, not a very advanced neighbor at all, fairly primitive neighbor that someone came along and sold a bunch of military hardware to, and so they got kind of a little overly ambitious and bigger than their britches.
Oh, okay. And so do they actually have a military base? The planet's called Sonara? Is that the name of the planet?
Well, that's not how they pronounce it, obviously, but that's how we pronounce what we say. Wouldn't be the first time that a bunch of Anglos made names so that we could pronounce them.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so you were there for, you said 2 years? Did I hear that
2 years,
right?
about 2 years. Yeah, about 2 years.
Wow. Okay. And helping protect the people, more or less, in the land there?
No, I was stationed at a military base there. Our goal as a military operation there was to basically fight this war for them. They were not militarily capable, and so we came along to essentially do it for them. The assessment was that it wouldn't be that big of a deal, wouldn't take that much time. 2 years, fairly short time for a war with an entire planet. So it was really something that we showed up to do it because they couldn't really do it, and so we weren't really protecting the people of Sonara because they weren't being directly threatened by, the sort of battlefront at that point. So just being stationed there is like, the equivalent of, kind of like the equivalent of sort of being stationed, in Tokyo during the Korean War or something. I mean, you're not that far away, but you're also nowhere near where the action or the battles are happening. So at no point were we really trying to protect the Japanese people during the Korean War because they weren't at risk. So in this sense, there were colonies and science stations that were Sonoran territory that were, sort of at threat. But that wasn't really my job either. My job wasn't necessarily protecting people. My job was high-value target retrieval or assassination. So essentially we get high-value targets, people that are important. We either go in and rescue them or go in and kill them, depending on whether they were someone we wanted to keep or someone we wanted to kill. So my job was a little more specialized in that sense.
Okay, and the people on there were humanoid, correct? I mean, they were more or less humanoid.
I would say that physiologically, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a Sonoran and a Terran, with the exception of the iris of the eyeball. That's what's different. They have kind of we have concentric circle iris. They have a swirly iris. It's kind of a odd S shape.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
It's really distinct. It is actually kind of pretty. It's very distinct. But other than that, physiologically, they're almost the same. And so we're definitely an interesting close relative, that's for sure, of some kind.
Okay, so did you get to know, are they called the Sonorans? Is that what they're called?
That's what we call them, sure, the Sonorans.
Okay. So did you get to know any families and people while you were there?
Oh, yeah. There was a gentleman who I actually, one of the first people I rescued as a high-value target, who was a Sonoran scientist, and I got to meet his family and became very well acquainted with him, actually. Yeah, I got invited to dinner a lot at his place.
Okay, so that's actually what I was thinking about, believe it or not, but I must have had the injury.
Yeah, no worries, you got the ankle thing. I don't know where you got the ankle thing, but that's okay.
I thought it was on Gaia, but anyway, no big deal. I apologize. Okay,
no.
So
let me put it this way. At what point in my career would an injury not have been able to be healed up within a matter of hours based on the technology that we're using? No, I'm not trying to pick on you for that. I'm just saying, yeah, I can't imagine that I ever would have said that anywhere at any time.
Okay, so it's all good. It's all good. In my reality, I never said you were injured for a long time. I just said I thought you had hurt your ankle going down steps, and that it was taken care of very quickly. Gosh, that is so weird. Can't think of a story that I would relate that would have related to that where I hurt myself going down steps. In fact, yeah, I'm kind of at a loss to trying to think of an ankle injury like that. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm confusing it with something else, but what I really want the people to know is not so much about the injury, but more about what you can share since you were kind of brought into the family there, what you can share about, the things that often we're interested in, like personalities. Let's start with like personalities. I'll list off a bunch of stuff and you can describe so kind of their general personalities, their sense of humor, how similar is that to ours or not?
Yeah, very, very, very similar, actually. It wouldn't be that different than visiting with Europeans, they're really similar, but you'd also be, some sociological language, kind of differences, but, they would be really, 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 really similar. So, I would say socially, they're quite a bit more functional than we are as a society. So imagine people who are very much like us, but probably more like Europeans, who are way more socially functional and, not very anger prone. So they're pretty calm, pretty intellectual. They can be very, very verbose, very wordy, depending on what they're talking about.
Both with
very. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Both with their. So they have a language they use with their voice, and then also telepathy abilities, or just language.
Yeah, I would call them a psionically emergent species, which we are also a psionically emergent species. I would say as a psionically emergent species, they're probably, anywhere from 150 to 250 years ahead of us on that sort of development scale, that we could sort of be where they are psionically in another couple hundred years, which is, again, only sort of slightly more, the average bar is only sort of slightly higher than our average bar, but, significantly, but slightly really on the scale.
Okay, so close enough to really be able to easily relate and everything.
Very,
else.
very. Like I said, very. Like you run into certain things about food and certain things about certain social patterns and certain behaviors. Again, in the same way that if we were traveling here on planet Earth and you'd meet other Terrans, you'd find some differences in the way people talk and communicate and socially behave and so forth. But we're still pretty much, the same, more than we're different. So it's all sort of just a social, sociological, more than anything, sort of behaviors and, functionality versus our sort of Terran dysfunctionality, which is our sort of neutral gear, our main gear, instead of the abnormal gear, unfortunately.
Okay. So, there's so many subheadings I want you to comment on, like we're doing. So I know this sounds kind of standard, but what about facial hair? Styles of hair?
No, totally. Yeah, they can grow facial hair. I'd say that mustache, at the time that I was there, fashion-wise, mustaches were fairly common for men.
And what
kind of big ones too, big bushy ones too. Not so much beards. Not that you wouldn't see someone with a beard, but not so much beards. Clean shaven, also acceptable. But probably big furry mustaches and some, clean shaven faces and not a lot of beards is sort of their facial hair preferences when I was there. But like I'm sure we do, it's the thing that would change, with them over decades, sort of fashion kind of stuff. So who knows what's the same now.
And general height. And
about the same. I would say most
or endomorphs.
I would say most of them were really about where we are, between sort of 5 and 6 feet tall.
Okay.
Yeah.
So very, very similar. What about clothes?
So they wore clothes.
Styles, textures.
Okay. the fabrics, I would say they had a variety of fabrics that clothes could come in. I would say the fashion design was not non-existent, but certainly not to the level of what human fashion design is. So their clothes were I would say, simple and attractive enough. They looked good enough on the people who wore them. But I wouldn't say that they had the same fit quality that a lot of our clothing does. But they're, the fabrics were certainly, very finely manufactured, well-manufactured fabrics and fibers. But the design was a little. I would just say a little less. I mean, maybe if you gave a design class to a high school, garment making class, it's kind of the kind of thing you might end up with. Nothing that fancy or nothing that great, but
So the picture
the thing that was interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The picture I get is kind of practical and bulky or something.
To be honest, they were a little. They weren't exactly the kind of clothes that make your physical definitions look really amazing. They're a little frumpy, but kind of for everybody. So it's not like.
Are they all the same colors?
Not all the same color. However, major cities have color themes that are associated with the city. And so you will see, depending on the city you're in, buildings that are different shades of that color across the entire landscape. You'll see lamp posts that are that color. You'll see benches that are that color. You'll see lines on the street that are that color. And you'll see a predominance of people wearing clothes that are that color. So, yeah, they have a very interesting thing about their sort of...
Fascinating.
They have this very interesting relationship between civic pride, the color associated with that civic pride, and then clothing that seems to sort of reflect, that color or color scheme in some cases. So...
I've studied color and the power of that. Did they share with you, so say the family that you said had invited you in, the scientists, what district were they in and what was their colors?
They were in a city that was predominantly emerald green. It was the primary color of that city. It's not again, pronouncing their language is really difficult. To do it sound right, so I'm not even going to try to do it for people because I can hear myself and it sounds horrible when I do it, and so so I couldn't pronounce the name of the city for you, and I don't know that we had a different name, an Anglo name for it, but it was not the capital city. I did visit the capital city, but it was not the capital city. But it was it was a pretty big city, I think, for I guess for some of the size of the cities that they have, which were not that large. They had a pretty decent-sized population, but their individual... Let me put it this way. They had more cities on their planet that were smaller, whereas we have, kind of more fewer cities that are bigger, if that sort of makes sense. There was kind of more metropolitan centers that were smaller than sort of the metropolitan centers we have. They would consider the metropolitan centers we have to be ridiculously overcrowded and overdensed, and why in the world would you do that and put people that close and make it that difficult to pump water and electricity and waste water, and why would you do that? They would think that would be incredibly condensed and wasteful and packing people in like animals.
Are they big on nature? Do they make a priority
I mean, they
less
completely
people, more nature?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that they really... They have a very completely green society. I mean, they don't pollute. They don't have fossil fuel burning. They don't, where they're dumping toxins and waste into the rivers and the ocean and so forth. They have a completely clean industry, so that they're not polluting their environment because they understand long-term, well-being of a planetary environment requires that you, treat it like the inside of your home. You don't go dumping, shit and oil and toxic waste on the inside of your home because you have to live there. And if you treat your planet like the inside of your home, then you want to keep it clean. Planet's the same way. You keep it clean. You don't dump stuff all over the place. So they have a clean environment. They have some large natural areas for sure. I mean, the planet is not so densely populated by any means that there isn't vast swaths of natural land, all across the place. They certainly do. I think their population was probably less than, 5.5 billion total for the entire planetary size, which was just slightly bigger than Earth. I think it's sort of the physical size. Their gravity is like 1.1 or something like that. So it's maybe, less than 10% bigger, volume-wise.
And water and all of that stuff?
Oh, water's plentiful, definitely, green-blue vegetative planet. Oh, yeah. But, with a variety of ecosystems in the sense that they had rainforests, they had deserts, they had, grassy plains and so forth. They had a pretty interesting, what I would say a normal range of ecosystems on a planet that would experience varying weather conditions like we do.
What about animals? Do they have pets or animals outside?
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
I
mean, they absolutely have wildlife. As far as like house pet companions, they family that I stayed with sometimes, and they had a marmoset, sort of a marmoset. Think of about a marmoset, but like twice the size of a marmoset, but super domesticated. So like the most chilled out, relaxed marmoset that you've ever like met in the world. And that was, their little pet Bobo. I called him Bobo. I didn't like the name that they called him, so I just called him Bobo.
So kind of a mix
cute.
between a ragdoll cat and a beaver or something. So pretty.
Well, and you got to look up a picture of what a marmoset is, and then sort of extrapolate from that. The ears are a little fluffier. But he didn't know what to think of me the first time he met me, because he clearly smelled something that I smelled completely foreign and like anything he'd ever smelled, and he was not okay with that. So he kind of steered clear to me at first. But I started bringing. They issue us these little protein bars, these little vitamin protein bars. Well, they're like these little vitamin protein bars that, when you need, quick food, carbos or whatever, and they're usually chocolate or vanilla flavored or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I would bring a few of those and, pull them out of my pocket and bust off, pieces, and he would sniff at it, and apparently he liked chocolate. So, I started feeding him those things, and then we became friends.
Oh.
So
how long?
Then when I would come over, he would basically come up to me and crawl like up and down, sniffing my pockets, looking for like, where's the treat? Come on, I know you
yeah. So is that like the major animal, or for pets? They obviously don't have the. Was that the major animal for a pet?
I wouldn't say that I was super familiar with like their range of domesticated pets. Interestingly enough, not completely unlike Terrans. Yeah, it's not uncommon for someone to have a fish habitat or a bird habitat, sort of in their home. I mean, there were some interesting relationships that people had with sort of domesticated animals that varied. I don't remember any dogs, but I do remember. I don't want to say our domesticated cat or a feline that you or whatever recognized, but something that seemed to be similar to some kind of felinus. They were pretty good size, actually, though. They're pretty fat. But, so something sort of like a cat, but not exactly. Like if you saw it, you'd be like, is that a cat? Maybe sort of. But, yeah.
Okay. And were the animals telepathic there?
No, not that I experienced. I mean, they were smart. They had smart domesticated, animals, or at least the marmoset that I, was around. He seemed pretty smart, but he's a primate, so, smart. But no, I don't think I personally can't say I experienced all the animal life on that planet, but I never experienced one that seemed to be like, hey, what's up? We're telepathic over here. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what about food? Like, did you have a meal with his family at all?
Lots and lots.
Okay, so can you tell us what that was like, how they prepare it?
Well, I would say that their food is, to be honest, not a lot different from ours. The main differences are way less sugar in everything. Like
that makes sense. Because they'd be more health-conscious.
Yeah. But I think it's also like they never had a point in their history where someone was like, hey, let's mass produce this concentrated sugar and feed it to everybody. So I think it just didn't happen for them historically where that occurred. And so they didn't have an entire population addicted to sugar like we do. They have, in fact, it was some of their food was, I had to choke down a little bit because it was a little plain in some cases. And I remember the first time I was trying to explain cake to his wife. And so I was like, all right, I'll have the cook make me up a little cake, and had the cook at the base make me up a little cake and took it over to them. And they couldn't hardly choke it down. It was so sweet. And so, but she was like, okay, let me take this and like see if I analyze it and see if I can't make some cake. And I was like, all right. So she took what was left of the cake and made a cake. A Sonoran cake, which was, to be honest, sort of like
sawdust.
No. Kind of like chocolate sourdough bread, to be honest with you.
Whoa.
Yeah,
wow.
Kind of like chocolate, but yeah, and not fluffy, not like a fluffy cake. I think she and I had the conversation about like eggs and fluffiness, and she was like, yeah, okay. So I think she did better after that. Her subsequent cakes were fluffier anyway, but not much sweeter because they couldn't handle like a sweet cake. So they would basically, it was like a barely sweet, chocolate sourdough bread.
Yeah. It sounds like they're lovely, and it sounds like they really took you in as kind of like a family member or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Are they that way with, quote, off-worlders, in general, or people? Or?
No. I mean, they're not super isolationist when it comes to off-worlders, but no, I mean, as far as his family was concerned, I saved his life, and so they were incredibly grateful, and I think they went a little above and beyond to be courteous to me. Not that they're very hospitable. I think that just to invite an off-worlder into their home in the way that they did wouldn't necessarily have been the first thing that they'd done if it was just somebody they just happened to meet through work. I'm not saying they wouldn't show that person hospitality, but not 3 times a week.
Which is lovely if you're going to stay somewhere for 2 years. So by implication of what you're saying, my guess is that this person you saved was the target. Your job or something.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The scientist.
The father. Yeah, the scientist's father.
And what was his specialty?
Some kind of meteorologist, geologist, some kind of, environmental, scientist or something, meaning he studied things about the relationships between, meteorology, geology. He was stationed on another planet at the time that he was doing research on, and this was it was a smaller planet that was a completely different gaseous sort of makeup. So it wasn't an oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide anywhere. It was something completely different than that. And he tried to explain it to me a couple of times, and somehow the chemical relationship in the atmosphere and sort of geomagnetic activity had this weather relationship. And so he was studying this relationship between, I think, geomagnetic electric activity that was essentially lightning that came from the ground out of geomagnetic activity, which is pretty weird. And then this gaseous environment, again, that was not oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, so somehow it was more conductive, and that it created weather patterns. Anyway, something like that. He tried to explain it to me, not my cup of tea, so I, think something like that. But so he was there, being stationed there, and the planet got invaded, and so we, they had a list of people to get out, and he was on my list, so I got him out.
Way to go! Woo!
Yeah.
Okay, what about their lifespan?
They're a little old. They get a little older. I'd say that they tend to. So they do have the ability to medically extend lifespan beyond their natural lifespan. But right now their natural lifespan is probably right around 2 or 250 years.
Yeah.
They seem pretty content with that at the moment. So they don't do a lot of having people live hundreds of years, even though they could. They kind of seem to be pretty content. I'm 235. I can go. They tend to have that's plenty. I can say I've had a complete life after that many years and be perfectly happy to move on, start over, whatever they're doing. But yeah, between 200 and 250 years.
Which of course brings up the whole concept of spirituality and religions, and I would imagine they're more spiritual than religious in terms of their belief system of souls and who they are.
No, I would say actually the very opposite of that. I would say that there were some what I would call religious relics of previous eras, so that there was an official sort of priesthood, and they had little temples, and but it was very small. The number of devotees is very small, and people in the civilian population see it as literally nothing more than hanging onto a piece of history. No one, and I mean no one, takes religion seriously. No one takes religious explanations for anything seriously. No one takes religious mythology seriously. No one takes religious explanations for anything as anything other than what tiny-minded, unscientific people do to explain things that they can't understand are scientific. They are a deeply academic, scientific, and mathematical people, and their approach to their psionic development is completely 100% scientific and has nothing to do with religion or spirituality. They would just, if you tried to use spirituality terms, they would say, no, you're not talking about it right. It's physics, it's math.
Well, you know what? So you would feel quite coherent with him because your psionic class that you teach is based all on physics, the higher physics, correct?
Yeah, that's because all of the really good psionic species that we've ever met have been very clear about that this is all science, math, physics, nothing else, not anything else. It's math, science, and physics. If you think about it in a different way, you're gonna get lost. You're gonna end up in a psionic dead end, or worse yet, start a cult.
Okay. All right. Fascinating. What about art, music, dancing? What are their favorite pastimes? Things like that.
No, they're very artistic. They're very artistic. They're also very musical.
Describe.
Yeah, and well, interestingly enough, and fortunately enough, I suppose for me, they use the same chromatic musical scale that we do, which is not normal. That's actually pretty unusual to have the same chromatic musical scale. There are some species that use the same scale, but a lot who don't. A lot who use very different pentonic scales and sort of dodeca. I mean, there's so many different mathematical variations of musical scales, and what an A is or would be in somebody's scale that can be so different, can make music really foreign if it's played on a different scale and the notes are really different. They're not going to sound right to your ear at all, but our music wouldn't sound right to somebody else's ear. So interestingly enough, they used the same chromatic scale. So their music was actually enjoyable sometimes. I'm not sure how I would describe as to say very fond of string instruments. I say that. They're very fond of string instruments.
You just read my mind. I was going to ask if they had those.
Not having had a close look at one or two, though, I would have to say that maybe someone who makes violins or guitars could look at that and like tell you what's happening. I don't think I could tell you what was happening other than to say there's some similar physics happening here, but also something happening in a way that I have no idea how to explain what's different about this. So,
okay.
For instance,
and what about dancing?
For instance, most of our musical instruments have like a single bridge for strings. I would say that most of their instruments did not have a linear position for all the strings, and so you had strings that were on different bridges at different angles to the echo chamber body, which all created slightly different sounds.
Now,
think of like a guitar that was crossed with a bagpipe.
Wow. Was any of that design carried over into the geometry of their buildings? Meaning like... Okay.
No, I would not in any sort of normal way. Their architecture had a whole different kind of theme to it. It was gorgeous, but it definitely had its own theme. So,
like what?
So they like some tall buildings, not like skyscrapers necessarily that we like to make, but they had some tall buildings that were, easily, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 stories. But instead of having a skyscraper or a building that has a square base or a rectangular base, the base would be round or oblong.
Oh, that makes sense.
So instead of flat surfaces, it would be curved surfaces. So very roundy, sort of architecture. To be honest, it's very kind of pretty on the eye when you're staring at a skyline that's all sort of curved, tall buildings.
Find that true.
Kind of makes your eye go, that's kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, some people think the square buildings we have and stuff, the energy gets trapped in corners. And a Palladian person was talking about their buildings being more dome structure, kind of,
sure.
Because of a whole energetic to it.
Sure.
The same time,
yeah.
right?
No, they had a few. They had a few. Some of their civic buildings, city halls, courthouses, and so forth, were like domed buildings with big domes. But a lot of their, other residential and business sort of buildings, again, with these sort of tall, roundy shapes.
Okay, great. I know people will be really interested in extraterrestrial relationships, partnering, and having children, i.e. sex. So if you could briefly describe that, that'd be awesome.
Well, this very wonderful scientist and his wife lived with their son and their adult daughter and their pet Bobo. And his daughter took a bit of a liking to me. And there was an occasion where he took me aside and said, it's very clear that my daughter likes you very much. I said, yes, that is very clear. And he was like, isn't she beautiful? It's like, well, yes, of course she is. Isn't she smart? Yes, of course she is. Well, then why do you keep rejecting her? And I was like, oh, well, because where I come from, you don't hit on a man's daughter that, you know through work. I was like, that's how I was raised, that you don't do that sort of thing. And he said, oh, okay, I understand that. And he says, well, you're here and you live here, and I want you to know that, if you reject my daughter again, she's going to be hurt and I'm going to be insulted. And I was like, okay,
really...
all right, okay, all right, well, I know that. All right, okay, all right. If you're cool, I'm cool.
You did your duty, right?
Yeah, all right. I would say that, we had a relationship for the better part of that 2-year period. And I mean, because we're so very similar, I would say the sexual interaction is not very different. I would say that it's fairly similar as far as what's different about Sonaran sex and human sex. Not much, except that Sonaran females make this cute little sound. It's a little trill sound that they make. It's kind of cute, and it's kind of adorable, and it's kind of hypnotic. And I've been told by Sonaran men that female trilling is really sexy and really hot, and so I don't know that I understand it the same way, but I was aroused when she did it, so it apparently is a cross species kind of thing.
It's like an aphrodisiac. There's something there. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously we have similar pheromones and similar hormones. I mean, again, we're super, super similar. So I guess I shouldn't expect anything to be so super different, but there to be some sort of variation there. But that was interesting for sure. Oh, how beautiful. So you're not going to do documentation for the audience of the trilling?
Oh, no, I can't. Again, no, I can't.
Because you're a male.
I'm a male. I couldn't do it right. I couldn't make the sound right. I'd have to teach some girl how to make a Sonaran trill and then have her do it for you.
And be happy ever after. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing something so intimate. That is really lovely.
Yeah.
And what about partnering in couples?
Yeah. I'm sorry, say again?
What about partnering? Because I know that often in higher cultures, they're not so always monogamous.
Sure. Excuse me. So marriage is a thing in their culture, but a little old-fashioned. So, not as common for mated pairs to be married, but being a mated pair is also a legal arrangement. So, if you're a mated pair, there are sort of lawful, rules about children and child raising and so forth that would come to play that would be legally binding, even though you're not married. Marriage is more this formalization. But anytime two people decide that they're going to have a child together, then you're automatically a legally mated pair.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So and we had one child while I was there. We had a son, and I got to see him, for maybe a month and a half before I had to go. So at least I got to hold him. But hopefully I'll get to see him again. That would be really nice. Don't make me think about it too hard. Anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry. And they have the same gestation period, pretty much, and all that stuff.
It's actually about 8 months. So it's actually a little shorter. It's not 9 months. It's like about 8 months.
Oh. Well, you'll get back there someday, right?
Oh yeah, no. When the travel embargo goes down, I'll absolutely take a trip for sure.
Oh, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that, because I know that's, really private and close to your heart, I imagine. Now, we have a lot of mental disease on this planet, and I imagine that they have a way that they have learned to deal with that. Could you share that? Or if they even have mental disease, they may not.
Sure. I mean, it can happen. But the way that they avoid it being a social problem is that most, mental health, behavioral health conditions are treatable if you understand what's happening at the neurobiological, biochemical, glandular levels, and you can mess with that to make it, things that aren't function correctly, and if you intervene early. So the medical exams, the thorough state-mandated medical exams, I want to point out, meaning that as a citizen, you would not have the freedom to not go to your state-mandated health exam. You would have to show up to your state-mandated health exam, and if it is determined that you have certain conditions, you're going to be treated for them whether you want to or not, because you will not be allowed as a citizen to harm or damage society by making irresponsible health decisions. So in some cases, health decisions are not given to the individual. They are given to society at large, because individuals don't make healthy decisions for society at large. They make decisions for themselves. And so in this situation, they consider collective responsibility to be more important than individual freedom. So you would not be allowed to not take your kid in and not have them examined and have them say, your kid's bipolar, we're going to fix them so that they don't grow messed up. And you wouldn't be able to say, no, you can't take away my freedoms. You'd be like, yeah, please fix my kid so he's not messed up and doesn't screw shit up when he gets older. Thank you. We love you for fixing my kid. So they have a completely different relationship, with their social structure and their state structure and their governmental structure. There's a lot more governmental trust. They trust their system. They trust their government way more than we do.
Well, that comes with a slightly higher consciousness, don't you think?
To be honest, no.
Really.
If you want to get into the discussion about civilization, it comes down to two different mental attitudes. One is barbarism, and the other is civilization. And people either have a mental attitude that motivates them towards things that are considered barbarism, or they have a social mental attitude that motivates them towards social responsibility and collective responsibility. And that's the difference between people who care about civilization and people who want to be barbarians. Okay, that's very succinct. Now, wow, time's just flying by. So a little bit about the Centauri. Sure, they're our closest neighbor. Well, our closest star system neighbor, yeah, sure. And there. Sorry, go ahead. No. Go for it, hon. So I'd say that physical stature, they tend to be a little shorter. They tend to be sort of in the 4.5 to 5.5 foot range, not so much the 5 to 6 foot range. Tend to have darker features, tend to have dark hair, tend to have olive skin. In some cases, much darker than olive skin. Very smart. Their cities are definitely a little bit more densely packed, a little bit bigger. They get a little bit more like our cities can be, being, you know, big and more crowded.
Were you there for a similar reason?
No, not at all. I was there for a training mission, to be honest with you. We have a military base on Centauri, and there was a specialist training division there, which I won't give any more details about, but I had to do 2 weeks on Centauri for this training mission at this very specialized training base that's on Centauri Prime.
Okay. And
so I was only there 2 weeks, but I mean, we had to go to class, and then when we were done with class, you know, the barracks were, you know, you could wander on and off base, and we got to go down the street and go to sort of the market area and go shopping and eat food and stuff and be tourists. So it was kind of nice.
Okay. Well, cool. Okay, so just for brevity's sake, I want you to speak a little bit about what I feel is one of my favorite ET species that most people think are myths, but originally came from the stars, but have been here, I think, since Ice Age at least, the Sasquatch. And you've had a chance to play with them a little bit, right?
Well, I've had this very interesting series of experiences through my life here on planet Earth, and one of them includes a number of run-ins with these big furry Sasquatch dudes, Enkidu. We call them Enkidu in the program, because in the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, he had this friend named Enkidu, and Enkidu is this big, tall, furry, stinky warrior who we're pretty sure is the same species that we're sort of referring to when we talk about Sasquatch, Bigfoots. We're sort of talking about the Enkidu. But that was a long time ago. So we think there's also now more than one subspecies. And so the subspecies are devolved primates, meaning they're not as psionically gifted. They're not as, you know, psionically conscious or communicative, and in some cases may represent a hazard or a threat if you ran into one in the wilderness. But chances are you wouldn't run into one because they're so far from civilization. You'd literally probably have to hike in some of the places where they live in the continental United States. You would have to hike in by foot for 2 weeks to get into where you might be in the territory where you might run into one. That's how far we're talking about. We're not talking about 5 hours from the city or a 2-day hike. We're talking about like a 2-day hike from the last road that you could possibly get to, farther into wilderness territory, maybe even by horseback, before you'd even be in the territory that those would be in. So if they choose to be anywhere near where we are, it's usually a choice. There are some experts who have studied migratory patterns and so forth better than I have, but there's a couple of devolved species which some people talk about as, you know, the American skunk ape or something like that. But the Enkidu themselves, they've been around for a very long time. We don't think that they're originally from here. We think that they came here maybe something like 500,000 years ago.
That's what they say. I mean, that's what they say themselves. Yeah, about that, and that they've kind of been here ever since, and that they have kind of found their little niche in their relationship, which includes being guardians of, they're often referred to in some native cultures as the guardians of the underworld. So we kind of know that they tend to hang around caverns and open spaces that could lead to tunnels or caverns that go further into the earth or down into the Agartha network, but you're not likely to get through them without, you know, their permission. And from what I've heard from also personal accounts, people who have been to where they're really
certain, based on sightings and so forth, where some of these caves are, and have gotten to the entrances of the caves and heard a loud screeching noise that all they could say was, it was so scary, I didn't want to do anything but go away. I didn't want to even go anywhere near whatever was making that noise, and I was just like, I'm outie. So
exactly.
they tend to keep people away. But that's my understanding.
And they stump branches, and they throw rocks whizzing past your head, and all.
Oh yeah. I was one of the interactions that I had hiked up this trail for a little while, and then the trail ended, and there was a creek, which was along this creek, and there was stones in the middle of the creek, and if you hopped from stone to stone to stone, you could go up the middle of the creek bed, which is what I did, and went up for I don't know, a couple of hours, way past where normally people would have gone past that trail. It was way too rough. This is in Northern California, so very along the coast, really rainforesty, difficult vegetation to trudge through. So you couldn't just wander off the trail. You'd literally need a machete. So we went up the creek, got to the spot where there's this beautiful flat rock hidden by this pool that these two little waterfalls were dropping into. It was super picturesque. And as I'm sitting on this rock, with the sun behind me coming through the trees, I see in front of me a shadow of something that goes behind me that was very large. It was not a bird. It was not something tiny or small. It was something very, very large that made a very big shadow as it went from my left side to my right side. And of course, naturally, I spun my head around and saw nothing. I turned both ways. I saw nothing. I heard something. And I turned back, was looking the other way again. A few seconds there, and it jumps from my right side to my left side. The shadow goes
it's
again.
Playing
and
with
they, and they went, and they went back and forth and did that for an hour. Every time I turned around, I couldn't see anything, and every time I turned back the other way, it'd be some matter of seconds before this big shadow would, go right behind me and block the sun, and I would, whip my around and be like, okay, you guys are hilarious.
Well, they also knew you were psionic, obviously, because they're psionic.
Yeah, probably.
Right?
Probably.
Yeah,
probably. They're big practical jokers. Big practical jokers.
Yeah. So they're share some of their abilities.
Well, psionic mastery is a thing of individual prowess. So depending on which individual you might be talking about would have what level of advanced ability. But I would say they're very telepathic. That's sort of a baseline ability. People have reported watching them vanish into thin air, like ranchers pulling out their rifle, thinking, I'm going to shoot that thing, and then having it literally disappear from the middle of a dirt road path, not jump into the trees, not jump behind a bush, just vanish into thin air and disappear. I've seen them appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. I saw one appear out of the corner of my eye, and I mean, I saw it as vivid as day. And it was only, it was maybe 10 feet from me. And it was so freaking clear. But the minute I turned my head to get a full-on view of it, there was nothing there. It was gone. It was so light and fast.
Playing with you.
But I can say, as a trained observer, I wasn't just seeing something. As a trained observer, I didn't imagine what I saw. As a trained observer, something popped out of nowhere. I saw a very clear image of it out of the corner of my eye, and then when I turned to actually get a full view with both eyes, it was already gone.
Exactly. So they do dimensional jumping, telepathic, playful, mysterious, can cloak,
Yeah,
and,
possibly even move through solid rock. Probably even, phase out of, sort of third density. Yeah. Or possibly be able to phase out of 3D and straight into, like I said, through solid rock.
There are a few people that I've talked to and worked with that have very well-developed relationships with the more advanced ones, to the point where they actually begin to write English. It was just so beautiful. So
interesting.
That was such a fun. Yeah, we got more to share down the line, Randy. So thank you so much. This has been so fun. And why don't you give people your contact information and where our listeners can go for private psionic readings from you or Q&A. And also, folks, I can guarantee it is rare to find someone that is teaching to civilians, someone who has Randy's width and depth of experience. So please take advantage of that. And I certainly have. And Randy, you were the kind of teacher I had wished for in school when I was so bored. So why don't you tell them where to contact you?
Sure. My website is www.covertspacecowboy.com, all one word. There's information for anybody who wants to have personal consultation appointments with me. There's a link for that. The online psionics course we're doing the beta class right now, but I think we're letting people sign up still. So if people want to jump in and sign up, they can. Or if you want to wait until we're done with the beta class in another, week or two when we do the official launch, you're welcome to wait for that. But I think the link can take you through and get you signed up if that's what you really want to do. The Facebook page is the Captain Randy Cramer Facebook page. If you want to do there, it's all kind of the same information linked together on consultations, the class, and other stuff that's coming. So we're definitely working on some stuff.
Cool. That's so wonderful. Well, as you know, I'm signed up for that. So thank you so much, Randy, for your brilliant expertise and generosity of spirit. And folks, please join us in 2 weeks for part 6, where Randy will talk next time. We've gotten you warmed up with humanoid ETs, and now we're going to introduce you next to some non-humanoid ETs, which will be good preparation for you, and as well as some other little treats in there. So, and for those of you that haven't had a chance to listen to the end of the last radio show we had, there's some very important information about a possible scenario, likely scenario that will roll out, and some suggestions for you in the next 3 months that Randy announced and explained. So please review that. And until then, remember to stay calm, stand up, do not give away your power or consent away to any authority that out of fear. Keep non-polarizing as possible. Raise your energy with positive visions of the world you wish to create, and take small action steps in cooperation with that vision, so that we all act as true custodians of the sacred planet that we were meant to be. So I love you, Randy, and thank you again. Thank you, people, and until then, upward and onward.